He came home to say sorry, but his father was already gone. Yet somehow, love was still waiting for him by the river. The rain fell like tears that night. In the small African village of Edendale, the air was thick with grief. Inside a dimly lit house at the edge of the dusty road, Daniel Cole sat by a wooden table, staring at a single candle flame. It trembled, just like his hands. Beside him lay a small, framed photo, his wife Miriam and their daughter Hope, smiling beneath the mango tree behind their old school. He hadn't smiled like that in years. Now, Hope was gone. The house was silent, except for the sound of the leaking roof. One drop, then another, marking time he no longer wished to live in. He whispered into the darkness, "If I could just go back one more time, I'd do it differently." The wind outside howled, and then something strange happened. The village clock tower, which hadn't worked in years, struck midnight. 12 heavy chimes echoed through the night, shaking the still air. Then, silence. The candle went out, and Daniel's world went black. When he opened his eyes, sunlight pierced through the window. Birds chirped. Children laughed outside. He blinked, confused. The house looked different, brighter. The walls freshly painted, the floor clean. And from the kitchen came a familiar voice, one that made his heart stop. "Daniel, breakfast is ready. Don't make Hope late for school again." He froze. That voice, that laugh, it was Miriam. Daniel stumbled toward the kitchen, and there she was, alive, smiling, stirring porridge in her yellow dress. And behind her, barefoot and giggling, was Hope, their 8-year-old daughter, tying her school ribbon. The spoon slipped from his hand. His knees gave out. He was back in time. Hope ran up to him. "Papa, are you okay?" Her tiny fingers brushed his tear-stained face. He couldn't speak. He just hugged her, holding on like she might vanish if he blinked. Miriam laughed softly. "You act like you haven't seen her in years." He looked at his wife, alive, glowing, unaware that in his world she had been gone for 5 long years. "I haven't," he whispered. That morning, Daniel walked Hope to school. The dusty road shimmered under the golden sun. Neighbors waved, chickens scattered, and the smell of roasted corn filled the air. But Daniel's mind was spinning. Every corner looked the same, yet different. He passed the big tree where Hope once scraped her knee. He remembered scolding her instead of helping. He remembered walking away in anger and how she cried. Now, as they reached that same spot, she tripped again. Instinctively, Daniel ran, kneeling beside her. He lifted her gently, dusting off her dress. "It's okay, my sunshine. Don't cry." Hope blinked. "You never call me that, Papa." His throat tightened. "I should have, a long time ago." For the first time, Daniel realized time had not taken him backward to change history. It had taken him backward to remember how precious it was. Every smile, every word, every chance he had once wasted. He was being forced to live them again, not to undo them, but to feel them. As the sun set, he watched Hope run toward the river, her laughter echoing. Miriam called out, "Daniel, are you coming?" He looked at them both and whispered, "Maybe time has mercy after all." That night, he tucked Hope into bed. She looked up at him and said, "Papa, if you ever get lost in time, I'll come find you. Okay?" He smiled weakly. "Okay, my angel." Then, the clock in the living room began to tick louder, faster, until the sound filled his ears. The air shimmered, the candle blew out, and when he opened his eyes again, he was back, in the empty, broken house. The rain had stopped. The photo still sat on the table. But the clock on the wall, the one that hadn't worked for years, was ticking again. Daniel fell to his knees, clutching the photo of his wife and child. He was crying, but this time not out of despair. "Thank you," he whispered to the silence. "Thank you for letting me see them again." Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, almost like a heartbeat. Time had looked back and given him one more reason to move forward. The next night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The ticking clock echoed through the quiet house, slow, heavy, like footsteps of a memory coming closer. He sat by the window, staring into the dark sky. The moon glowed weakly behind drifting clouds, the same way his heart glowed beneath years of sorrow. "Why did you bring me back?" he whispered to the night. "To torture me or to teach me?" The wind answered with silence. Then 12 chimes again. Midnight. And in an instant, the world shifted. Daniel gasped as the sound of drums filled his ears, children laughing, the smell of roasted corn, and bright fabrics dancing under the morning sun. He was back in the village market. But this time, he knew exactly where he was. He knew what day it was. The day Hope fell silent. She was 12 then, playful, curious, full of light. That day, she had begged him to come watch her recite her poem at the village school competition. But Daniel had been too busy arguing with the school board, angry that they'd rejected his teaching proposal. He had chosen pride over presence. He remembered shouting, "I'll come later," but later never came. Now, time had taken him there again. And this time, Hope stood before him, holding a small notebook, eyes shining with excitement. "Papa, you promised you'd listen today." His heart broke. "Yes, I remember." "You'll be there?" He forced a smile. "I'll be there." As they walked toward the school grounds, Daniel noticed every small thing. The children running barefoot, the teachers laughing, the bright ribbons on Hope's hair dancing in the breeze. Each detail felt sacred now, fragile, like glass he didn't want to break. Hope looked up. "Papa, do you think time can talk?" He hesitated. "Maybe it doesn't talk. Maybe it listens." "Then maybe time heard me praying for you." Her innocence cut through him like sunlight through clouds. When they reached the school, Daniel stood among the parents. Hope climbed the small wooden stage. Her voice trembled at first, then grew strong. Her poem was about love, forgiveness, and fathers. Every word pierced Daniel's soul. Even when the sun hides, the moon will remember to shine, because love never leaves, it only waits in time. Tears filled his eyes. He clapped harder than anyone. Hope smiled at him, proud, glowing. But then came the sound that froze everything. A loud crash from the road beside the school. Screams, running feet. Daniel turned and saw a truck skidding toward the crowd. Hope jumped down from the stage to help a child who had tripped. Daniel's heart stopped. He ran, but time moved slower than his legs. The truck's brakes screamed, then silence. Daniel fell to his knees, holding Hope in his arms, her ribbon covered in dust. She opened her eyes weakly, smiling through pain. "Papa, you came." "Yes, my angel. I'm here." Then time kept its promise. And just like that, she was gone again. The sky darkened. The market sounds faded. Daniel's tears fell on the ground like rain. He screamed her name. Once, twice, but only the ticking of the invisible clock answered him. The world began to blur. The sound of the chimes returned, echoing like distant thunder. 12 strikes, each one taking him farther from her, until the market dissolved into shadows. He woke again, in the present, alone. The clock on the wall now ticked faster. Alive, restless, unforgiving. Daniel knelt before it. If this is punishment, I deserve it. But if it's mercy, let me see her one last time. The wind outside carried the scent of rain, the same scent from the night before hope died. Somewhere deep inside, Daniel understood. Time wasn't punishing him. It was guiding him. To forgiveness, not perfection. He whispered to the photo on the table, "I'm sorry, Hope, for every time I said later, for every moment I didn't show up. I'll never waste another second again." The clock's ticking slowed. Calm, steady. And for a moment, Daniel thought he heard her laughter again. Faint, but real. A promise that time still remembered him. The night was silent. The wind no longer howled. Only the clock ticked softly, steady as a heartbeat, as if time itself was watching Daniel. He sat on the edge of his bed, eyes swollen from tears. Hope's laughter still echoed in his mind. Every second reminded him that the past he once ignored was now the only thing keeping him alive. He whispered, "If time wants to teach me, then show me what I failed to see." And as if it had been waiting for his words, the clock struck 12. The room trembled. The candlelight folded inward, and once again, Daniel was gone. When he opened his eyes, he was standing inside a classroom. Chalk dust in the air, sunlight spilling through wooden windows. The blackboard read, "Edendale Secondary School Staff Meeting." His heart skipped. He remembered this day. It was the day Miriam walked out of his life. Miriam had always been more than a wife. She had been his partner, his friend, his quiet strength. But Daniel, proud and stubborn, had drowned himself in work and anger after losing his teaching promotion. He stopped listening. He stopped seeing her. Now she stood before him, alive, graceful, her hair tied in a red scarf, her eyes full of both love and exhaustion. She held a lunch basket. "You forgot your food again," she said softly. "I brought it." He remembered this moment, how he had brushed her off. But now, standing here again, he saw what he had missed. The trembling in her hands, the disappointment hidden behind her smile. He swallowed hard. "Miriam." She looked at him, surprised. "You're calling me like you haven't seen me in years." He smiled sadly. "Maybe I haven't." They sat under the mango tree outside the classroom. Children ran across the field, their laughter rising like music. Miriam placed the food between them, jollof rice and fried plantain, his favorite. "You've changed, Daniel," she said quietly. "You work all day, come home angry, and talk like love is a burden." He looked at her face, the lines of patience, the eyes still soft despite the pain. "I was trying to build a future for us," he whispered. "And in doing that, you forgot us." Her words hit him like stones. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I can't keep reaching for someone who's already walked away." He wanted to scream, "I'm still here," but time had already written what came next. She stood up. He remembered this moment too well. The moment she decided to leave for her sister's house. The moment everything fell silent between them. Desperate, Daniel stood. "Miriam, please, don't go this time." She paused. "This time?" He stepped closer. "If I could turn back the clock, I'd love you louder. I'd listen more. I'd fight less." Her eyes softened. "Then do it now." He froze. "Now?" Every second we have is now, Daniel. That's all we ever get." Her words echoed as the sky dimmed, the colors fading around her. She smiled one last time, touching his face. "Don't waste time proving you were right. Spend it showing you care." And then she was gone. Daniel collapsed beneath the mango tree, clutching the empty lunch basket. The clock chimes returned, slow, echoing through the silence. He shouted into the air, "I'm sorry. I see it now. You were the love I forgot to love." The ground shimmered. The school faded away. He awoke again in his dark house. The basket from the past now sat on his table, real, untouched, as if time had returned it to him. He ran his fingers over it, whispering, "You loved me when I didn't deserve it." The ticking of the clock softened, steady, almost forgiving. He knew now that time wasn't just showing him memories. It was opening wounds so he could finally heal them. That night, Daniel placed the lunch basket beside Hope's photo and Miriam's old scarf. He lit a candle and smiled weakly. "I lost everything because I forgot to love what I already had." The flame flickered, and for a moment he thought he saw her shadow dancing on the wall, graceful, peaceful, waiting for him to remember. Sometimes the heaviest thing a man can carry isn't a burden on his back. It's his own younger self. The morning light slipped through the cracks of Daniel's window like silent judgment. The clock had stopped ticking again, its hands frozen at the same hour he'd lost everything. He rubbed his eyes, praying it was all just a cruel dream. But when he looked up, the world had changed once more. The room was smaller. The air smelled of chalk and sweat. Outside, he could hear the laughter of teenage boys, the clatter of bicycles, and the echo of a school bell. Daniel turned slowly toward the mirror hanging crooked on the wall and gasped. He wasn't the old man anymore. He was standing in the body of his younger self, the proud, ambitious Daniel of 20 years ago. He looked sharp in a neatly pressed white shirt and tie, eyes burning with hunger and arrogance. The world had not yet taught him humility. As he stepped outside, the village of Edendale looked alive. The red earth, the chatter of traders, the smell of roasted corn filling the air. Children ran barefoot past him, their laughter chasing the wind. But Daniel didn't smile. He was too busy thinking about the future. He saw a younger version of his friend, Peter, waiting by the roadside, waving a newspaper. "Dan, you're going to miss your meeting in the city." Daniel smirked. "Meetings don't start till I arrive." That was the man he once was, full of himself, too proud to notice the small hands reaching for his attention back home. It felt strange, watching himself move through old days he'd already lived, but this time with the pain of knowing where it would all lead. He saw his wife, Miriam, standing by the gate as he left. She looked so young, so full of hope. "Don't be late, Daniel," she said softly. "Evelyn has her school play this evening." He brushed her off with a quick nod. "I'll see if I can make it," he muttered. That single line, "I'll see if I can make it," echoed in his mind like thunder. He remembered exactly what came next. He didn't make it. Time bent around him again. The city melted away, replaced by the small school compound, filled with lights and children performing under a banner that read, "Our heroes, our dreams." He saw the stage. He saw little Evelyn waiting, dressed like a butterfly, eyes scanning the crowd. And he saw himself, younger Daniel, still sitting in a bar miles away, laughing with men who called him boss. The older Daniel screamed into the air, trying to reach him. "Go home, please, just go home. But his younger self couldn't hear him. He took another drink. A thunderstorm rolled over the village that night, and with it came the accident that changed everything. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was standing in the same bar. But now, everyone was gone except his younger self, sitting across the table. "You," the young man said, his voice cold. "You think you can change me?" Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm not here to change you," he whispered. "I'm here to forgive you." The younger Daniel's expression softened. "Forgive me? For what?" "For being too proud to love," he said, voice trembling. "For thinking success was louder than kindness. For not knowing that time doesn't wait for men like us." The bar began to crumble around them. The sound of rain turned into the ticking of a clock. Daniel awoke in his present-day home, lying on the cold floor beside the stopped clock. His hands were trembling. The sun was rising outside, gentle and forgiving. For the first time in years, he smiled. Not because he was healed, but because he was ready to be. He looked at the framed photo of Miriam and Evelyn and whispered, "I understand now. I'm sorry." And the clock began to tick again. A home doesn't die when people leave it. It dies the day laughter stops echoing within its walls. The night was quiet when Daniel awoke again, not in his home, but on a familiar dusty road. A full moon hung above, silver and haunting. Ahead of him stood a house he hadn't seen in years, the one he once called home. The compound was overgrown with weeds. The walls were cracked, the paint eaten by time, but something about it still breathed, like a ghost that refused to fade. Daniel stepped closer, his chest tight. Every footstep felt heavier, as if the earth itself was warning him not to go back inside. He pushed open the gate. It creaked, loud and painful, like a cry from the past. The moment he entered, time folded in on itself. The weeds vanished, the air warmed, and suddenly, laughter filled the yard. His wife's laughter. There she was, Miriam, younger and radiant, chasing little Evelyn around the courtyard. The scent of stew floated from the kitchen. The sun painted everything in gold. "Daddy's coming home today," Evelyn shouted, running in circles. Miriam smiled softly. "If he remembers," Daniel's throat tightened. He remembered this day, the day he had promised to come home early and didn't. The sun dipped low. The table was set. 3 plates, candles, and a bowl of warm soup. Miriam sat waiting, Evelyn asleep in her lap. The food grew cold, but she didn't move. From the shadows, the older Daniel watched. His heart trembled as the clock struck 9, then 10. He remembered exactly where he had been. Another meeting, another drink, another excuse. Miriam finally stood, carried Evelyn to bed, and blew out the candles. The moment the flame died, the whole house seemed to sigh, and the laughter that once filled it vanished into the dark. When Miriam walked past him, Daniel tried to speak. "Miriam," he whispered. To his shock, she turned, eyes full of tears, yet somehow aware of him. "You finally came home," she said softly. But too late. Daniel's knees went weak. "I didn't know. I thought I had time." She shook her head. "You had all the time. You just didn't use it." Her words hit like a hammer against his soul. "Do you think a house forgets laughter?" she asked. "Do you think love waits forever?" Her image began to fade, piece by piece, like smoke in sunlight. "Miriam, please," he cried, reaching out, but she was already gone. He fell to his knees in the center of the empty compound. Then, slowly, he began to hear it, faint but real, The sound of his daughter's laughter, his wife's humming, the soft echo of dinner plates clinking. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "I hear you now. I remember." A warm breeze passed through the yard, lifting dust and leaves into the moonlight, and for a moment he could swear the house smiled. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was back in his small, quiet house. The air felt different, gentler. He looked at the clock. It was ticking. On his table sat a photo frame that hadn't been there before, a picture of his wife and daughter, smiling in front of that same house. Daniel smiled weakly through tears. "The house didn't die," he murmured. "I just stopped coming home." He placed his hand on the photo and whispered, "I'm coming home now." You can't change the past, but you can choose what kind of tomorrow your pain will build. The morning after his vision, Daniel woke to the sound of birds outside his window. The clock was ticking steadily, its rhythm soft and alive. For the first time in years, the silence of his house didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. He walked outside. The sun was rising gently over the hills of Edendale, brushing the rooftops with gold. Children were walking to school, their laughter filling the air. Life was still moving. Time hadn't abandoned him after all. Daniel closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." But then a faint sound echoed from the distance, the same voice he'd heard before, a child's laughter. It came from the direction of the old market road. He followed it without thinking. At the edge of the village river sat a little girl, barefoot, humming softly as she folded paper boats. Her face glowed with sunlight, her hair tied with a red ribbon, the same color as Evelyn's had been. Daniel's breath caught. He crouched beside her. "Those are beautiful boats," he said gently. She smiled up at him. "They're for my daddy. He works far away, but I know he'll come home someday." The words struck him like lightning. He felt tears rising, but held them back. "What's your name?" he asked. "Hope," she said. "My name is Hope." The name felt like a message written directly for his soul. A man approached, tired, dusty, carrying firewood on his shoulder. His eyes widened when he saw Daniel talking to his daughter. "Sir, is everything okay?" he asked politely. Daniel smiled faintly. "She reminds me of someone I lost." The man nodded slowly. Loss has a way of teaching us what really matters. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the river flow. Daniel asked, "Do you ever get tired of trying?" The man chuckled softly. "Every day. But then she laughs, and I remember why I keep going." Something inside Daniel broke open, but not from pain, from realization. As he turned to leave, Hope ran up to him, holding a folded paper boat. "Take this," she said, "so you won't forget to come home." He knelt and accepted it with trembling hands. "I won't," he whispered. The river shimmered. The world around him began to blur again, as if time itself was giving him one last lesson. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was back in his small house. But this time, the walls were bright with sunlight, not shadows. He looked around and smiled. The clock was still ticking. The photo of Miriam and Evelyn sat on the table, beside a small red ribbon. And, in his hand, a folded paper boat. He understood now. Time hadn't brought him back to fix the past. It had brought him back to build the future. That day, Daniel walked to the local school and asked to volunteer. He started teaching again, not for money, but for meaning. The children loved him. He listened, guided, and told stories about forgiveness, hope, and time. Every afternoon, he would walk by the river and let a paper boat drift away. He never saw hope again, but somehow he always felt she was near. As the sun set one evening, Daniel stood outside his home, watching the horizon glow red and gold. He whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll love better. I'll listen more. I'll remember." The wind carried his words across the fields, and in the distance, the laughter of a child echoed softly. See, not a ghost this time, but a promise. The clock inside ticked on, steady and alive, and for the first time in forever, Daniel didn't feel haunted by time. He felt held by it. The sun had barely risen when Daniel walked down the narrow red path that led toward the heart of the village. A strange pull guided his steps, the same pull he had felt each time time itself shifted around him. He didn't know why he was here, only that he was being led. The path ended at a small wooden shop covered in creeping vines and surrounded by ticking sounds. Inside, hundreds of clocks hung from the walls, big ones, small ones, some carved from wood, others made of old metal scraps. They ticked in unison like a heartbeat. Behind the counter sat an old man with silver hair, his eyes bright like 1,000 dawns. "You came," the old man said, smiling, before Daniel even spoke. "Do I know you?" Daniel asked quietly. "You knew me once," the man replied, dusting off a large clock face. "When you were a boy, I fixed your father's wristwatch. You cried because you thought time had stopped forever." Daniel's throat tightened. "Are you saying you're—" "I am just a clockmaker," the man interrupted gently, "but I work for someone who mends what time cannot." Daniel looked around the room. Every clock seemed to tell a different story, each tick echoing like the voice of a memory. "Why am I here?" he asked. The clockmaker nodded toward a small chair by the window. "You are here because time has been trying to heal you, Daniel, but you keep running back to your pain." Daniel sat down, his hands trembling. "I lost my daughter. My wife left. My pride ruined everything. I wish I could start over." The old man smiled faintly. "If you started over, you would still be you. The lesson is not to erase pain, but to understand it." He reached under the table and brought out a small clock with a cracked glass face. "This is your time," he said. "It's been broken for years, but look closely." Inside the crack, Daniel saw something, flashes of his life. His wife laughing on their wedding day, hope running through the rain, himself shouting in anger, himself crying by her grave. He closed his eyes. "It's too late," he whispered. The clockmaker leaned forward. "Do you know what time does when something is broken?" Daniel shook his head. "It keeps moving, even with the cracks." Daniel felt a tear slip down his cheek. "Then why am I still being shown the past?" The old man stood and turned a large hourglass upside down on the counter. "Because you haven't finished your journey. One more step remains, the moment where everything began." As the last grain of sand fell, Daniel's surroundings began to shimmer. The clocks blurred. The ticking grew louder, faster. "Wait!" Daniel shouted. "Tell me what I'm supposed to do." The clockmaker's voice was calm, even as everything dissolved into light. "Forgive the man you used to be. Only then will time forgive you." Daniel's eyes opened, to find himself standing in front of an old classroom, his old classroom. The blackboard still carried his handwriting. The wooden desks were scratched with childish carvings, and at the back of the room sat a young man, himself 20 years younger, proud and angry. The younger Daniel slammed a book shut, muttering under his breath. I'm wasting my life here. I deserve better. The older Daniel froze, realizing this was the day he quit teaching, the day his pride began to build walls around his heart. Slowly, he walked toward his younger self. "Don't go," he whispered, voice breaking. "Stay. The people who love you, they need you more than you know." The younger version looked up sharply, though he couldn't see who was speaking. "Who's there?" "Someone who's learned what pride costs," the older Daniel answered. "Listen, you'll think success means leaving people behind. But one day, you'll learn that love is the only thing worth carrying forward." The younger man frowned, shaken by a voice he couldn't place. Then, without warning, everything went white again. Daniel woke on the floor of the clock shop. The hourglass on the counter was empty. The old man was gone. Only a single note remained beside the broken clock. It read, "Time does not heal. It teaches. The rest is up to you." Daniel held the note to his chest and wept, not from sorrow, but from release. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of the past. He was ready to forgive it. Outside, the village clock struck 12, and for the first time in years, it chimed clearly. The rain came without warning that evening. Not heavy, but slow and quiet, as though the sky was trying to speak softly to the earth. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, holding the cracked clock from the shop. Every tick echoed in his chest, like a heartbeat that wasn't sure if it wanted to go on. He had seen his past, his pride, and the faces he lost. Yet there was still someone he hadn't faced, Elena, his wife, the one he had pushed away long before the accident. He closed his eyes and whispered, "If time still has something to show me, let it be her." The world blurred. The ticking grew faster, then silence. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was standing in front of the old house they once shared, freshly painted, flowers blooming by the door. A younger version of Elena stood in the doorway, folding laundry, her laughter soft as wind chimes. She hadn't yet learned how cruel grief could be. Daniel walked closer, heart pounding. She couldn't see him, yet he could smell her perfume, the same one she wore the day Hope was born. He stood there for a long moment, watching the gentle rhythm of her movements, the small things he had once ignored. Then he heard it, the front door creaking open and a small child running out. Hope, 5 years old, barefoot, chasing a butterfly across the yard. Daniel fell to his knees. "Hope," he whispered, voice trembling. Eleanor's laughter joined her daughter's. "Careful, my little one, don't trip." The sound of their joy broke something open inside him. All the anger, all the pride, all the words he had thrown like stones, they felt meaningless against this one simple, perfect moment. He followed them quietly as they walked toward the river near their home. The water shimmered in the sunset, just as it always had, a mirror to the past. There, Elena knelt beside Hope, teaching her how to fold a paper boat. Hope's small fingers trembled as she worked, giggling when it finally floated. Daniel whispered to the wind, "I remember this day. It was the last happy day before everything fell apart." That evening, he had argued with Elena about money, about work, about his pride. Hope had hidden behind the door, crying silently. He had told his wife that love couldn't fill a man's stomach, and she had replied that pride couldn't fill a man's heart. He had walked out that night, the first step toward losing everything. As if time heard his thoughts, the scene began to shift. The river darkened, the laughter faded, He now saw himself, the younger Daniel, and storming down the path, slamming the door behind him while Elena cried, clutching Hope tightly. "Please don't go," she had begged, but he never turned back. The older Daniel shouted through the storm, though no one could hear him. "Turn around! She's begging you to stay, please!" Tears streamed down his face as the younger him disappeared into the darkness. He turned toward Elena's figure. She was frozen in place, her eyes filled with pain, the rain soaking her hair. "I was so blind," Daniel whispered. "You were never my enemy." He reached out, his trembling hand hovering above her shoulder, and for a brief moment, she turned her head as if she could feel him. For the first time in years, she looked straight at him. "Daniel," she said softly, "you can still come home." Then she faded, like smoke carried away by wind. Daniel gasped as the world dissolved again. He found himself back in his dark, empty house, the rain still tapping against the window. The clock in his hands ticked slower now, each sound a whisper of finality. He fell to his knees and began to sob, not out of guilt this time, but from love. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the air, "for everything I couldn't say, for everything I didn't see." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the picture frame on the wall, a photograph of Elena and Hope smiling at the river. He reached for it, clutching it tightly against his chest. In that moment, he felt something warm, a faint hand on his shoulder, gentle and familiar. A whisper followed. "Forgiveness doesn't live in yesterday, Daniel. It lives in what you choose to do tomorrow." He looked around, but there was no one there. Only the cracked clock glowing faintly on the table, its hands frozen at midnight. He smiled through his tears. Then tomorrow begins now. Outside, the rain stopped. The night grew quiet, but in that quiet, time itself seemed to breathe again. The morning light crept slowly into Daniel's house, slipping through the cracks in the old wooden shutters like shy messengers of a new day. For the first time in years, he didn't wake with anger or regret. He just sat there, still, the sound of the ticking clock beside him blending with the songs of distant birds. He had traveled through time, faced his ghosts, and seen what love looked like before pride ruined it. But now, time had returned him home, back to the present, back to what was left. He walked to the mirror in his living room and paused. His reflection stared back at him, older, tired, but somehow lighter. His eyes no longer carried the sharpness of guilt. They carried softness, like rain after a long drought. He whispered to himself, "It's not about going back anymore. It's about what I do now." He looked around the room. Dust covered the furniture, and cobwebs clung to the corners. It was as if his home had been waiting for him to return, not from a journey across time, but from the prison of his own heart. He picked up a broom and began to clean. Each sweep felt like an apology, each movement a silent prayer. By afternoon, the house was alive again. He opened the windows wide, letting in the sunlight, the sound of children playing, and the smell of roasted maize from a nearby stall. For a moment, he stood at the window and smiled. Then something caught his eye. Across the road, near the marketplace, a woman was struggling to lift a heavy basket of yams. Daniel hesitated, then walked over to help. "Thank you, sir," the woman said, wiping sweat from her brow. "You're welcome," Daniel replied softly. "I should have been doing this long ago." The woman laughed lightly. "You talk like a man who's just come back from a long journey." He smiled faintly. "You have no idea." Later that day, Daniel made his way to the school where he used to teach. The building was old now, paint peeling, walls cracked, but the sound of children laughing inside filled the air with life. He walked in slowly, greeted by the head teacher, Mrs. Ebel, who looked at him with surprise. "Daniel Cole, after all these years," she said, smiling warmly, "we thought you left for good." "So did I." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were one of the best we ever had." The children still read your old lessons. Her words pierced him, not with pain, but with remembrance. He turned to the blackboard and ran his hand across it, feeling the chalk dust on his fingers. "May I?" he asked. "Of course," she said. He took a piece of chalk and wrote 3 simple words across the board. "Begin again today." The children read it aloud in unison, their voices pure and bright. Something inside Daniel broke open, not into sorrow this time, but into hope. As he left the school, he heard laughter behind him. Turning around, he saw a small girl standing by the fence, the same girl he'd met by the river. She waved, holding a paper boat in her hand. "Did you make that?" Daniel asked. She nodded proudly. "My daddy taught me." The words struck him like sunlight through clouds. He smiled. "That's a good man." The girl grinned. "He says, the river carries our wishes to heaven." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He knelt beside her and whispered, "Then send mine too, will you?" The girl nodded, placed the boat gently on the flowing water of a nearby stream, and watched it drift away. That evening, Daniel walked back home under the golden glow of sunset. Every step felt lighter, every breath easier. The clockmaker's words echoed in his mind. Time doesn't heal. It teaches, and he finally understood. It had never been about changing the past. It was about transforming the man who lived through it. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel sat outside his house, watching children play, couples walk, and the village hum with life. He whispered, "Hope, Elena, I'm living now. Not in yesterday, not in tomorrow. Here. In the time you both gave me, the wind stirred gently, carrying the faint sound of laughter, familiar, warm, and eternal." Daniel closed his eyes and smiled. For the first time, time didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a friend. The first light of dawn stretched over the hills, brushing the roofs of the village in a tender gold. Daniel sat by his doorway, listening to the distant laughter of children walking to school. It had been months since his journey through time, months of quiet rebuilding. He had found peace, yes, but not yet forgiveness. Not from himself, and not from the one person who mattered most, his son, Michael. That morning, Daniel held a small envelope in his hands. The paper was worn, his handwriting trembling but hopeful. He had written to Michael 3 times before. No reply. But this one was different. This one wasn't asking for forgiveness. It was offering it. He whispered, almost in prayer, "If tomorrow never comes, at least let him know his father tried." He sealed the envelope, handed it to the village courier, and watched him ride away on his bicycle down the dusty road. Then Daniel waited, not with expectation, but with quiet faith. The Harmattan winds returned, dusting the earth with the scent of dry leaves and memory. Daniel spent his afternoons teaching at the school again, his evenings tending to the small garden behind his house. One afternoon, while watering his plants, he heard a sound that made his heart stumble, the sharp, familiar honk of a city car stopping at his gate. He turned slowly. Standing there, dressed neatly in city clothes, was Michael. Older, taller. His eyes held both surprise and hesitation. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the wind moved, rustling leaves, carrying years of silence between them. Daniel's voice broke the stillness. "Michael," his son's lips trembled. "Father." The single word cracked something open inside Daniel. He dropped the watering can, his hands shaking. "I didn't think you'd come," Daniel whispered. "I almost didn't," Michael said softly. "But I read your letter." He looked around, the cleaned house, the flowers blooming in the garden, the repaired school behind them. "You changed, Father," Michael said, almost in disbelief. Daniel nodded, tears rising. "Time gave me another chance, but not to go back, to finally move forward." Michael stepped closer. "Do you still blame yourself?" Daniel smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Not anymore. I learned that forgiveness isn't what we receive. It's what we choose to give." For the first time in decades, father and son sat together under the mango tree. Daniel brewed tea, the same way his wife used to. As the steam rose, Michael said, "You know, I used to dream of asking you why you left, why you didn't fight for us." Daniel looked down, voice trembling. "Because I thought I didn't deserve to. I thought time would erase it, but time, it only waited for me to face it." A tear slipped down Michael's cheek. "I was angry for so long, but now, seeing you like this, I think maybe time healed us both." Daniel reached across the table and took his son's hand. "Then, let's not waste what we have left." As the evening sun melted into crimson and gold, villagers passed by, greeting Daniel and his son with smiles. Some whispered, "They've made peace." The world seemed softer. Even the clock on Daniel's wall, once a painful reminder, now ticked like a lullaby. Later that night, Daniel brought out a small wooden box. Inside was his late wife's locket, the one he'd carried for years. He opened it and handed it to Michael. "She'd want you to have it," he said quietly. Michael looked at the picture inside, his mother smiling, young and radiant. He pressed it to his heart. "She'd be proud of you, Father." Daniel's lips quivered. "No, son. She'd be proud of us." They sat in silence, watching the stars unfold above them. The night air carried the faint hum of crickets and distant drums from the neighboring village. Michael broke the silence. "Do you still think time can be changed?" Daniel smiled softly, eyes glimmering with peace. "No, my son. But we can change what we do with the time we're given." At dawn, Michael prepared to return to the city. He embraced his father tightly, the kind of hug that rewrites history without words. "Come visit soon," Daniel said, tears welling. "I will," Michael promised. "Not as a visitor this time, as a son." When the car disappeared down the hill, Daniel looked at the sunrise. The air shimmered with warmth, the village alive with sound. He whispered into the wind, "The gift of tomorrow is today." Then he smiled, a man no longer haunted by time, but carried gently within it. The rains came early that year. The village skies, once golden with sunrise, were now heavy with clouds, grey, endless, and full of memory. The soft rhythm of raindrops on Daniel's roof felt almost like whispers from the past. He sat by the window, wrapped in a faded shawl, listening to the storm. His health had begun to fail, but his spirit was light, peaceful, unafraid. Sometimes peace comes not from the absence of pain, but from the acceptance of it. It had been nearly a year since Michael's visit. They spoke often now, letters, calls, sometimes visits that filled the house with laughter again. The garden had bloomed beautifully, and Daniel often said to himself, "Forgiveness grows faster than flowers." But that morning, he woke with a strange heaviness in his chest. Not sorrow, something deeper, something final. He looked around his small, tidy home, the clock still ticking gently, the framed photos of his wife and son smiling from the wall. He whispered, "I think my time is folding." Later that day, as the rain softened, Daniel took a slow walk to the riverside, the same place where he once met the little girl with the paper boat. The air was fresh, cool, and filled with the smell of wet earth. To his surprise, she was there again. Older now, maybe 12, still playing by the water. "You came back," she said, grinning. Daniel smiled faintly. "Seems I always end up here." She looked at him closely. "You look tired, sir." He nodded. "I'm just running out of hours." The girl frowned. But time never runs out. It just keeps moving. Her innocence pierced him like light through cloud. He knelt beside her, watching the stream flow. Maybe that's the lesson. We don't stop time. We join it. She looked thoughtful, then whispered, "Do you still send wishes to heaven?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Every day." As they sat there, she pulled out a paper boat, carefully folded, small and simple. "This one's for you," she said, "for your wish." Daniel's hands trembled as he held it. "Thank you, child." He placed it on the water, his eyes following it as it drifted away, carrying his final wish, though he never said it aloud. If he had, it would have been this: "Let my love outlive me." That evening, the rain returned. Harder this time. Thunder rolled across the valley, shaking the walls of his house, but Daniel sat calmly in his chair, wrapped in a blanket, holding the locket that once belonged to his wife. He opened it, staring at the small, faded picture inside. Her smile still as bright as memory. He whispered, "Elena, I think I'm ready to come home." At that very moment, miles away in the city, Michael was sitting at his desk when his phone rang. It was the village courier. His voice trembled. "Sir, it's your father. He's gone." Michael froze. The world around him blurred. The sounds of the city with cars, voices, machines, all fell silent. A weight pressed against his chest, and he whispered, "No, not yet. I wasn't done." He drove through the night, the storm raging, tears mixing with rain on his face. By dawn, he reached the village, the house quiet, the door open, the clock still ticking beside Daniel's chair. Daniel sat peacefully, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face, the locket in his hand. A paper boat rested on the table beside him, damp but intact. Michael fell to his knees. He held his father's hand and wept, not from regret this time, but from gratitude. He whispered, "You found your time, Father, and somehow you gave me mine." Later that day, the whole village gathered to honor the man they'd once called the lost teacher. Children sang songs of hope. The girl from the river placed another paper boat on his grave. As it floated away, she whispered, "He's just traveling again, through time." That night, under a clear sky, Michael sat by the river where his father used to sit. The stars reflected in the water like scattered candle. He took the locket from his pocket and opened it. Inside was not just his mother's picture now, but also a folded note in Daniel's handwriting. "Time gave me the chance to love again. Don't waste yours waiting for perfect moments. Make them. Every sunrise is forever." Michael closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks, and whispered to the wind, I will, father. I promise. The village of Ndukwe woke to the smell of rain-washed earth and the distant hum of morning drums. The river, once swollen with grief, now flowed calm and steady, a mirror of the sky above. Michael stood by the window of his late father's hut. The morning sun crept through the wooden shutters, falling softly on Daniel's empty chair. The blanket still hung there, the locket still lay open, and beside it, the paper boat. He picked it up with trembling fingers, the paper fragile and damp from the night before. On its tiny folded edge, he saw faint handwriting, his father's, the same pen strokes that had filled his childhood with stories and letters. Where love flows, time stands still. Those were the last words his father ever wrote. Michael's chest tightened. For the first time, he didn't cry. He simply smiled through the ache, the kind of smile that knows loss and peace at once. Outside, villagers were already gathering by the river. Word had spread that Daniel the teacher, the man who once rebuilt hope in a broken village, would be remembered that morning. The crowd stood in silence as the priest spoke. Time may take our bodies, he said softly, but love is the echo that never fades. The wind stirred, leaves whispered, birds perched quietly on nearby trees as though even nature paused to listen. Michael stepped forward, carrying a small wooden box. Inside were the ashes of his father, wrapped in white cloth. He knelt by the river's edge, the same place where Daniel had released the paper boat, and whispered, "You didn't die, Papa. You just went ahead to rest." He opened the box, letting the ashes scatter into the flowing water. The current carried them gently downstream, glistening under sunlight. Somewhere in that moment, he felt it, a presence, soft and familiar. The air grew still. Time seemed to pause, and in the ripples of the river, he thought he saw his father's reflection, smiling. Weeks passed. Michael stayed in Ndukwe, repairing his father's home, teaching children at the village school. He built a small library in Daniel's name, filling it with books his father once loved, tales of hope, wisdom, and forgiveness. Every Sunday evening, he told stories to the children by the river, just as his father had once done. The little girl who had met Daniel, now known as Neka, became his helper. She often asked, "Uncle Michael, do you think Grandpa Daniel can see us?" Michael would smile, looking toward the river and the fading sunset. "Yes, Neka, he sees us, every time we choose love over pride." One evening, as twilight painted the sky in gold and violet, Michael walked to the river alone. He held a small paper boat, folded neatly. On it, he wrote in his father's handwriting, "Thank you for teaching me how to live." He placed it gently on the water, and the current carried it away, just like the first one. As the boat drifted, the wind calmed, the air glowed softly, and for a moment, everything stopped. The river, the wind, the trees, even time itself, stood still. Michael closed his eyes. He could hear his father's voice again, warm, calm, eternal. "Son, when you love deeply, you never truly say goodbye." He opened his eyes to see the paper boat fading into the horizon, the sunset wrapping it in gold. He smiled, tears rolling down his face, his heart finally at peace. That night, the stars above Ndukwe shone brighter than ever. Children played near the fire, laughter echoing through the village Daniel had once rebuilt. And by the river, the soft glow of moonlight danced on the water, as though heaven itself was watching, whispering back the story of love that had conquered time. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear from your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit the subscriber button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.